screen when it comes up. As I said, my name is Simon Wall. I'm a community architect employed by Mayo County Council, and I've been based in the town of Westport on the ground with the community for the past 22 years. And my job has been managing the built environment as part of the town management team. We're a little bit unique in terms of county councils that we do have local authority architects that are not just doing capital projects, but they're actually doing planning, and they're based full time within the municipal districts. I am one of those type of architects, have been for the past 20 years, and we're rolling them out within the other municipal districts. But to start off, can everyone hear me down the back there? Am I okay in terms of projection? Great, okay. So I'm the town architect to the town of Westport, and really just talking about rural Irish towns, you know, what is Westport? It's a small rural Irish town. We're based on a small, we're nothing essentially. We're a small town on a small island, off a slightly larger island, of an ever expanding Europe, I used to say, but perhaps it's contracting at the moment with Brexit. But just to survive as a rural Irish town, as Bono says in the song, you're almost running to stand still. And you have to punch above your weight to survive, because all the business and the economy is going east into Dublin. So how do you do that? It's all about cooperation. It's the local authority acting as a framework, leading from behind, putting together the volunteer groups, the chambers, the hotels and businesses, just like you are today as a collective consciousness for the town of Longford. I suppose that the first thing we did about 20 years ago, we tried to identify what are Westport's dual drivers. We're very fortunate to have an American multinational in town, and they manufacture the entire planet supply of Botox. Do you know what Botox is? But I thought you might say that. Well, the great thing about Botox is it gives us about 1,000 jobs in the town. And you know, if you're Tom Cruise in California, if you're on East End or you're on the West End in London, your Botox is 100% guaranteed Irish. So that's why we're always smiling. And the other big thing that drives us is tourism. Tourism is very important to us. And the Celtic Tiger has allowed us build a lot of bed nights, which in turn bring a lot of people in and give spin, economic spin into the town centre. I suppose, I'm not sure how easy it is to see this, but Westport is a planned estate town nestled in the shadow of Croagh Patrick, and it's an estate town designed by the Brown family of Westport House. And Westport House is a big tourism draw. We reckon it brings in about 50.7 million euro into the county per annum, because 60% of the people coming into County Mayo, the primary reason is to visit Westport House, and that's their spend. So it's a really important economic draw for us. The aerial shot of the town, the historic town core is 3 miles inland, and there's another town at the harbour, the Quay area, which is on the coast. And in the middle you have Westport House and its domain. And slowly the two towns are amalgamating into one in a horseshoe shape. There's a conurbation, as they'd say in the States. And that's my job, to structure how that built environment happens and what goes in there. This is a view of the town core. We're very fortunate that historically the Browns, when they planted out day one on a greenfield site, made it into a series of architectural civic spaces that interlinked in a journey that brought you up to the gates of Westport House and through the landscape where you glimpsed through copses of deciduous trees the front facade of the house, and ultimately got up to the front door, and you knew you were in I suppose the domain of someone very important. But what's nice about the main civic space is the octagon and the clock area, and particularly the river. They make for very pleasant places and give us a very good quality of life. And indeed you have a lot of those spaces here in Longford yourselves, because you were a laid out town from day one. But one of the biggest gestures they did is the Carabeg River. They canalised the river. It used to meander in an organic sort of haphazard manner. They canalised it into 2 lakes, which led you up on the visual axis with the front door of the house and brought you into the domain itself. The second area, which is 3 kilometres away, is down at the harbour, and that was generated by a lot of Section 23 tax designation, which happened about 15 years ago. And it was tax write-offs essentially for holiday home accommodation. And what we tried to do is bring all the holiday homes into one area, and apartments and hotels down at the harbour area. So we're not putting holiday residential components into existing residential areas, but in the wintertime they'd be empty, have negative social connotations. So we tried to put all the pubs and the clubs in one area beside the ocean, and it's worked pretty much very well, and the entrance into Westport House there. And we have greater plans in the future for a marina and to expand that. We're more Maura, I haven't met you before, but I've seen your work and it's wonderful. It's very inspiring, as well as your Irish dancing. This is our latest public realm space in the town centre. It won the RAI People's Choice Award in 2016, but we built it on the foot of another competition with the Irish Times, where they were looking for the best place to live in Ireland. So what we discovered in Westport over the years is, in terms of entering competitions, is very good. It galvanises a community very quickly. You put the best foot forward, and it brings success, and success breeds success, and you get multipliers. So we're perceived currently as being quite a successful town, having won a number of awards, including this one. But this wasn't always the case. This is Westport back in the 1980s, the main civic space, the Octagon, and it's completely underperforming. And what's interesting about this is not in your great-grandparents' time or your grandparents' time. This is within living memory. This is what Westport was like 25 years ago, and it was completely underperforming. And coming up to the millennium, we were wondering, are we going to die as a town? Are we going to die on our feet? Are we going to change and try and survive and thrive? So the seminal moment was coming up to the millennium. We decided that we would, instead of building a piece of sculpture or etching our names on a piece of stone, that we would commission an intellectual gift for the town. So in other words, we brought together planners, engineers and architects and put together an image-led integrated action plan. Just, could I have your one there? Just what you're doing now. We commissioned a plan like this, and we said it was about 30 or 40,000 at the time. It was very expensive, but we felt this would harness development into the future. We knew we were getting Section 23 tax designation. We knew finances were going to come in. We didn't expect the Celtic Tiger. So it came over the hill was a really strong economic, potent engine. And we put this plan on the back of it like a saddle, and we harnessed it to the extent that the Celtic Tiger became a very positive experience for the town, which is not something that said a lot around the nation. And Westport 2000 dealt with the really big things, where new streets, new plazas, where new residents should go, where important civic buildings should be, right down to the small things like signage. So it covered the whole gambit. But this is one illustration from our image-led integrated action plan, showing the town at the time. The white buildings were all the existing buildings. We knew we had oodles of brownfield sites in the backlands. They're industrial sites that buildings had been demolished on, and they were dormant in the backlands. And instead of expanding out into the rural countryside, what we tried to do as a local authority, we put a compulsory purchase order, not the backlands. And that gave us areas to start developing these master plans as part of our integrated action plan, and show where new car parking could go, so we could decrease the amount of car parking in the streetscape, bring it into the backlands, and create new public realm spaces. Also where we get new streets with commercial on the ground floor, and we have residential on the upper floor, bringing communities back into the town that had left the town core in the 40s, the 50s and the 60s out into the suburbs, where towns, suddenly rural Irish towns, were dying after 6 o'clock because everyone was driving out of the town centre. So we're trying to reverse that and bring people back in. And another thing, what we tried to do, that was looking at the really big things, new car parking here and here, down to the really small things like signage. The plan also covered that. And at the time, say 20 years ago, coming into Westport, really most junctions had over 30 illegal signs on them. They were growing like invasive species of plant out of the hedgerow. And it took about 2 years, but essentially we took them all the way in the back of a truck after a lot of consultation in the hotels, the B&Bs and all the various stakeholders. But if you put all the signage you remove flat on the ground, you'd remove about an acre. Now individually this doesn't make a big difference, but collectively it starts to have a very large impact. And I don't know if you can see this, but this is a junction. It's not in Longford, Armayo, it's in County Clare actually, but you see how irrelevant signage gets after a while. Another thing Westport 2000 looked at, our plan was planting. And this is the way we used to plant it, Victorian style, monoblock, single species planting. We did very well, and we won the National Tidy Towns with this. And what's very interesting when you win the National Tidy Towns, the central government get awfully interested in you. And they start sending you off as the national champions to different places around Europe to compete with the best in Europe. And we ended up in Limoges in France, and they're very good, that municipality. They have their own horticulturists and their own glass houses where they grow their stuff. And we were out in the pub there one night, and I took these photographs out, and I said to the main gardener, Pierre, I said, do you like our planting in Westport? And he said, no, I do not like it. And I said, gosh, I'm sorry about you. And he said, well, Simon, we will come to your lawns and we'll come next year and we will plant for you. So we all thought this was great, had a few more Irish coffees and went home. But sure enough, January came, Pierre rang on the phone and he says, we're coming, you have to pay for the diesel and the bulbs. And I said, that's great, come on over, we have a team ready for you. So the lads arrived, they planted all the bulbs, gave them a few Irish coffees again and sent them home. And we didn't think much about it till the heat came on. And all of a sudden, all our public areas where the French had planted with us, these sort of flowers started to come up. It's very popular in the continent. It has never been done in Ireland before. And you had things like decorative cabbage, beetroot, sugar beet gone to seed, and all sorts of stuff like that was coming out. And it just shows you how beautiful, a traffic island can be. In most towns in Ireland, traffic islands are reflective coloured paint and plastic boxes guiding traffic around. So traffic islands can be beautiful as well. And with the planting in all our public spaces, we probably spent about 4,000 or 5,000. You can spend 2 million on a new road between Castlebar and Westport, and no one gives a damn. You spend about 10 grand on planting, and you're the world's best. So it's all about the perception, how local authority spend money as well, and getting good PR gains. That's another traffic island in the town centre. Sometimes they become performance spaces. You get buskers and people dancing out there, different groups. Another thing we started doing when we had our new plan is we started offering colour schemes. I, as the community architect, would design a colour scheme free for anyone if they came into me, but all they had to bring was a photograph of their building and the neighbouring properties on both sides. I designed one scheme. If they didn't like it, I designed a second or a third scheme. And the actual colour wasn't that important. It was that they weren't getting the first bucket of magnolia they had underneath the staircase, which inevitably all the buildings ended up being yellow. And colour is fabulous because you spend about €400 on your facade painting your colour, and people say, gosh, your premises are great, you invested a lot of money. So you get a lot of bang for your buck. Whereas if you did a fit out on the inside, spend 30 grand, people are indifferent about it. So colour is really quick gain, great value for money, and it really lifts the town, and it starts a chain reaction of other people doing colours as well. So you can see here before and after, about €300 later, it's really lifted that premises. And I was saying, you can't really go wrong with colour either. And it's just all about repainting your building every 2 to 3 years. This is during the Celtic Tiger. Tom Braun came in to me, he said, Simon, I have this colour, it's lime green, bright yellow, fluorescent pink and orange. And I said, my God, will it work? And it's one of the nicest colour schemes of the Tiger. So it's all as well about changing your colour every 2 and 3 years. It's all about change and presenting your buildings. Another thing we started doing when planning applications were coming in during the Tiger period is conditioning out the plastic and metal windows and replacing them with sliding sash windows. And we only did that if it was a large project and the project could carry the cost of that. And it starts making a difference in your architectural conservation areas with the correct windows in. And again, individually it doesn't make a big difference, but collectively it starts having a big impact. And over that period, we probably replaced about 300 windows over the shops in the town centre. And it was very effective in terms of presenting our architectural conservation areas in the correct way. Any new buildings that were in infill sites in the town centre, this was a gap in the streetscape. We ensured when the application came in that the building's massing matched its neighbouring property, natural slate roof, tight gutter fascia eaves, details, sliding sash windows, and we don't allow any projecting signage as much as we can try and eliminate it, or projecting lighting on stalks. What we try and do is get the lighting built into the cornice of the shop front. And then we don't allow any security shutters because they just become an aluminium canvas for graffiti. But sometimes banks or jewellers insist on it. So we had a perforated screen and run it behind the glazing. So in the evening time there's animation on the shop front, and you can look in and you can shop in the evening time. So it makes the whole thing more active and more positive during the night time. We also had a lot of old stone buildings that were derelict in the backlands. And this one was just 4 walls. It had no interior floors and no roof. A carpenter owned it, and he said, what can I do with this? He came in for a pre-planning meeting. And we said, why don't you put your carpentry workshop on the ground floor, get 2 offices on the middle floor, so you get a rental income on the mortgage that you've purchased, that you've taken out to refurbish the building, and put your residence on the top floor. And he put a double height space in the front on what he calls his New York style loft apartment. So it's classic, going back to living over the shop. You have your premises below, and you have a little bit of income, and it secures a future for that building, which is a protected structure. But we did that many times in the backlands of the town centre, and brought residences and people in to the town core. We also looked, there's a lot of land in the town centres and the backlands. We have really long gardens along here. And we felt they're not of much use anymore. People tend not to grow as much in the back gardens, and they're all going derelict. So we as a local authority provided a social housing scheme here, and then we, the private sector, provided another block, a secondary terrace in the backlands, and ultimately they'll all connect together. And this was for a housing association in the UK. We brought back people that were living in Bedsits and Cricklewood. In the evening of life, they wanted to come back here, and they're within walking distance of the pharmacy, the shop, and the church, and they don't need a car. But you're getting people right back into the town centre. Some of the bigger schemes we did where we had to want greenfield sites. What we did with this one, we used an old-fashioned planning tool, which is essentially almost a Georgian-type square. We reduced the size of all the back gardens, and with the space we got from that, we made a big green space in the centre. And so everyone looked out and they could see the kids playing, so there's very good passive surveillance there. You also have 2, 3, 4 and 5 bedroomed units, so you get multi-generational occupation. If they're all 3-bed semi-Ds, you only get young couples starting off. So you get grandparents, large families, small families, and some office space here. So if you need to rent an office space and you're close to your home, you're walking back and forth. And we connect that to the greenway. We've linked about 70% of our residential areas with walking and cycling greenways. So if you're a child and you want to go to your neighbour's house, you don't have to get a lift for your parents in the car. You can walk in the greenways and you're safer, you can cycle. So it's made the whole town a lot more permeable. This is the Octagon, right in the town centre here. And on the left-hand side, this is a 9-acre site. And during the Celtic Tiger, we got a planning application on this site for 9 bungalows. And we refused it on the grounds that it was too low a density. It was probably the only development in the Celtic Tiger period that was refused for being too low a density. And we went to appeal from Bord Pleanála, an oral appeal, and we won it. But we eventually acquired the land. And what we did with it is we designed a social and affordable housing scheme in a nice crescent here. And one section we sold off for a primary healthcare centre. And we linked it up to the greenway here. So when the scheme is finished, I know it's a little dark, you have a nice radial crescent of social and affordable housing, the whole community within walking distance of the town centre. If you don't have a car, it doesn't matter, you're very close to the town core. And an important health centre here, all linked up to the greenway. There's about 66 residential units, a primary healthcare centre, a community building, and that would have been 8 or 9 bungalows. So it's important how we use these very precious sites in the town centre. You're going to get one chance of developing them. And they have to be developed at the right densities. And those densities should be higher than we've been dealing with in the past in terms of standalone houses on the edge of towns. And that's what we've done here. We really expanded the town at the same density at which it was developed during the Georgian period. Going back to Westport 2000 there, you can see where we have indicated where all the new development should be in the backlands. And this is what happened in reality. If you take the main streets in the town, you could only walk in the main streets 20 years ago. You couldn't get into the backlands. And every time a developer came in for planning permission, we insisted that he provided a pedestrian routeway through and gave him higher densities in the backlands, so you get new residential and commercial on the upper floors, a pedestrian routeway through. Where the blue circles are, is we as a local authority put compulsory purchase orders on the brownfield sites in the backlands, and for the short to medium term we provided lots of car parking to allow us pedestrianise more of the historic civic spaces. And so now, instead of just walking on the main blocks, there's a whole new series of pedestrian routeways crisscrossing the town centre, and a lot more residential and a lot more commercial. So instead of expanding out at low density, we've been trying to develop the town core. So that was the direct implications of having a plan. All our new streets in the backlands are pedestrian only. And this is what happens when streets are pedestrian. People start spilling out in the evening and having their lunch and their dinner. You get residential on the upper floors. Acoustically, it's a lot better to live in because main streets are very noisy these days. We have residential on the upper floor, commercial on the ground floor. Very little antisocial activity because at night time you have passive surveillance. If people are living on the upper floors, they're looking out, they're policing it. It's when people don't live above premises in the town centre that you get more antisocial behaviour. And again, car parking right behind, so there is immediate access for the car as well. This is just a simple intervention on the Octagon. We revamped the pavements, and when we did it, we took out 2 car parking spaces. And in taking out those 2 spaces, we provided this projecting area. We have a disabled access. We've put in a decorative lamp standard, and we've undergrounded all the overhead wires. And this could have been 2 vans parked outside here years ago all day, but now you have a view of this lovely Georgian building with Victorian alterations. And you start providing a quality of public realm space, even though it's very modest. And if you do that 50 or 60 times around the town centre, it starts making it a very desirable place to live. The car is always that big chestnut in terms of taking it out of the town centre. Back in 2004, we looked at our main street. This is our Grafton Street, essentially, Bridge Street, and we felt it was underperforming. A lot of hard surfaces, and it was completely dominated by the car. And you'd want to be an athlete to get from one side to the other, even on a good day, not to mind a rainy day like this. And so we said, what are they doing in the continent? What are they doing in Britain? And they were pedestrianising completely. So we got together with the community and said, what if we pedestrianise the street? And it was too big a risk just to do it once, and it may not work. So we said we'd have a trial. So we pedestrianised the street for 4 days on a June bank holiday weekend. And it went from this to this. So you can see, now the weather was good, which helped. But we also, at the time, someone mentioned that putting trees on the streetscape would be nice, it would soften it. So luckily enough, we were building our sewage treatment plant at the time, and the contractor gave us these sewer pipes for 4 days. And so they're big unused sewer pipes now. And the Tidy Towns painted them North Italian terracotta red. And we put them on forklift pallets. And at 6 in the morning, there was 2 sets of forklifts dropping these lovely trees like marching Roman sentinels going down the streetscape. And it really was a wonderful thing. People were coming out with wines and cheeses and teas and coffees. It really made the whole thing very continental and gave it great quality of life. But the big issue we had, there was 1.5 hour traffic jams on all the approach roads. So we discovered we couldn't immediately completely pedestrianise, but we could take away some space. But I love this photograph here with the cheese and the wine, because see this lady here wearing a sleeveless fur coat. That's how you know it's a Celtic Tiger photograph. But I'm reassured by the minister they're coming back. So really, it was really a very special day. So in the end, we had to have a compromise scheme. We ended up putting in the trees because they're very successful, reducing the amount of car parking space, and also in the town centre with our backland routeways. The street was long and narrow, and what we did is, because there was no big square or heart in the middle of it, where the main pedestrian crossing is, we widened it and framed it with 4 large semi-mature trees. And so that's the main crossing in the centre. You know, we had the surface of the pavement and the road the same, so the cars psychologically slow down. And I'm standing in one archway across to the other, looking at the pedestrian routeways. So, and as well as that, then we put in the trees as well. And you know, when I came to local authority first 20 years ago, we'd buy a small tree, you know, the girth of an old 50p piece, and we'd spend £400 on a tree guard, and the drunk comes out of the pub and he snaps it on you. And we discovered, you know, we could reduce our vandalism, which is the drunk coming out of the pub, by 95% if we discarded the tree guard and spent that money on buying a tree never less than the girth of a coffee mug. So the tree is about €500. Bring it in semi-mature. So when this tree was planted, this photograph is only 2 months later. So that's the size you got to bring trees in to make an impact. And look what happens when we plant a tree in the streetscape. This is the one car parking space that's taken away by the tree, which is 2.5 by 5 metres. And look what happens. You get a tree on the streetscape, it softens it. You get parents and kids pulling across with a buggy. You get a jeweller coming out and he's selling merchandise, and you get a lamppost, and you underground the overhead wires. So that car parking space is making your town very positive. It's working a lot harder for your town than this car parking space where the red car is. On you know, exact same spaces, but look what this is doing, the positivity it's bringing to your town. Now your car is the friend. It's about where you put the car, in the backlands, where you acquire more space. But it allows you to free up the main historic civic spaces and push the car a little bit out. So take away 1 space, look what you get. Take away 5 or 6 spaces, and look what you get. Take away 40 or 50 spaces, and look what more I got. It's a really important civic space that is a sentinel, in terms of cultural sentinel, in terms of Waterford's new presence within the national consciousness. I was given a talk once, there was an American guy, and I whipped these 2 slides off him. This could be Longford, it could be Waterford, possibly Westport. We're not quite as big. On Christmas Eve, you think you're really busy because the place is packed with cars. There's cars everywhere. The tills must be chinging. But in reality, most car journeys have just 1 person in the car. And the people here are very interesting, but it's the space between them. That acreage could be working a lot harder for your town. So the car's your friend. It got me from Westport to here in 2 hours, but it's about where you put the car. And the more you take the car to the town centre, the more successful your town becomes, and the irony, it attracts more cars. So the car's very good, but it's how you manage the car. So all those little things I've been talking about collectively, which are very small, let's see the difference it makes with the town's main civic space over 3 centuries. So this is the main civic space, the Octagon, in the 19th century, very pedestrian friendly, not a car to be seen. Social utopia. Every family lives above the premises below. There's so many kids packed into the upstairs of all those houses. Every street has its own football team. Every street has its own bonfire in St. John's Night. It's social utopia. And, you know, it's a real safe place to live, to work. There's a vibrancy about it, despite not many people in the photograph. Let's travel 100 years later. Same space. What's happened? People are emigrating, going to America, Australia, buildings being boarded up, and the advent of rural electrification, wires crisscrossing the streetscape, and the biggest social intrusion into any rural Irish town and urban centre is the advent of the motor car. That space that used to be the living vibrancy of our communities where people met and interacted becomes a sea of tarmac, and it becomes a car park. And this has happened slowly. It's not someone from the outside that has done it. It's us, it's our parents, it's our grandparents bringing the vehicle into the town centre. So with all those little things I've been talking about, let's see what happens with 25 years after the creation of your plant, which you've just done. Exact same space. So let's see what's happened. We've undergrounded the overhead wires. We've brought colour schemes into the town centre. We're bringing families into the upper floors, more commercial into the town core. We're bringing trees in to soften the streetscape. But the biggest thing, we've discriminated against the motor car into narrow circulation routes just in the town centre and muscled out to give more space to pedestrians. And this makes your town more desirable, more people want to be there. And it's all the little things that collectively when they come together. And this is what makes towns sing. And this is what makes them a desirable tourism destination and brings money into your town centre. Also trying to deliver other projects. What we've tried to do in recent years is local authority used to provide all the new civic buildings and a lot of the initiatives, but they don't have as much money anymore. It's the reality. And really what we're looking for now within towns is responsible citizenship, where voluntary and community groups, including the Chamber of Commerce, to come together and they put the foot forward into the space that local authorities used to be in the forefront in. And as well as that, if local communities come together with new projects, there's a greater sense of ownership. So local authorities now lead from behind as opposed to in front. And this is a project that we delivered as a new theatre for the town centre. And we try and deliver a new civic building every 10 years. So we looked at all the voluntary teams in the town, the elected representatives, the tidy towns, the hotels, the chambers, and the media. We put one person from those teams, and they come together, and they become a vehicle for getting grant aid, which the local authority help with, for providing a new capital project. And that capital project then is run by the community. And this is an example. There's an old parochial hall. The church gave it to us. Gave it to a community investment company, which was a series of people within the town, making a town team structured by the local authority. And they delivered a new $3.5 million theatre for the town centre. And it's run by the community. And civic buildings are so important because they bring people in from the outside, they bring a spend in. And these are all the various different events that have happened in the theatre since it's been done. Tommy Tiernan, comedy, news talk, book clubs, all that sort of stuff are bringing people into the town centre. And it's very good for small businesses, great football. And last year we ran the National Tidy Towns Conference in the town hall. It's a 225 seat venue. But again, if the community hadn't put it together, you wouldn't have 225 delegates in and spending money over the weekend. And Dermot Bannon hosts it. He was really excellent for us. Another big thing we've tried to do is, for a rural community, is outdoor adventure has been very good for us. And Killarney had the crown for years, and we never thought we could touch their cloak in the biblical term. But we've been pushing it a lot over the last 15 years, and we started with these Ironman. Do you know what the Ironman sort of thing is? And we discovered Ironman wasn't very good for us, because Ironman came to town, he ran his race, had his pasta, and he went to bed. So he didn't actually spend any money. So now we've geared the whole thing down for domestic man, for people like myself, who might do 2 or 3K, and you bring the level down. And domestic man comes and his wife and the kids, and they're all eating pizzas and they're having a fantastic time. They stay for 4 or 5 days. So all of these things were to push in a big way. And this is an image of our county manager, Peter Hines, after getting a difficult question at a council meeting on a Friday night. But I think he made it safely to the other side. But there's domestic man checking his watch there before he goes off. But you see, everyone's happy. You're having spend in town, the activities, small businesses are happy. They love eating, people in their towns, they love beer, and they love shopping. So it's all about creating activity. Another thing we've pushed very much is back in Noel Dempsey's time, he put money into smarter travel, which is essentially the road engineers have discovered after 60 or 70 years of providing new motorways that it only attracts more cars out onto the road and better roads. So they were looking at towns that could come up with ideas that they would give money to if they could come up with ideas to reduce the amount of car travel. And so we pitched for this, it's National Smarter Travel money, and we won about 5 million at the time, which was really great. It kept the salaries going for the outdoor staff in the town council during the recession. But essentially our proposal to central government was that if we linked 70% of our residential areas with greenways, that people would travel less in cars and they'd be walking to town. So we've built a huge amount of greenways in the town centre. It's been very successful. A big reduction in car journeys, around 5%, and which is a lot for people who are we're addicted to cars as a nation. And all the schools and various businesses are connected up to it with smarter travelling plans. And we have to build this building, which is the information centre for smarter travel yet, at the very end of it. And to try and get people to use the greenways, we have lots of initiatives like carpooling for various offices, and they get prizes for doing this. We also have bike buffets. So for 20 quid, you can get a 5-course meal, but you cycle between the hotels for each course. And we go around like a flash mob, about 150 people from place to place. So winning hearts and minds is very important too. We're nearly there now. And of course, we've also developed the Greenway from Westport up to Achill, the Great Western Greenway. It has completely reversed the fortunes of the towns of Mulranny, Newport and Achill Sound. They're brimming with cafes and a super highway of cyclists coming in. So the more you develop greenways, in fact, if you develop more greenways in Roscommon, the next time I can cycle here instead of coming here by car. But it brought in 175,000 users annually on the greenway, 90 plus jobs to the local economy, and brings in about 7.2 million each year. Last 5 or 6 slides. Westport has a plan. The State Town Westport Houses is very important to us. It has been in the ownership of the Brown family for the past 250 years until last year, and they were wonderful people. They were pioneers in terms of Irish tourism. This is Lord and Lady Altamont, and this is them celebrating 50 years in business. And a terrible thing happened in terms of planning back in the 1950s. That entrance from the town centre to Westport House I discussed earlier on was severed because the council at the time bought the front lawn of Westport House to provide housing for the people, even though Lord Altamont provided an alternative site. But it was very much a reflection of the politics of the nation at the time, despite the heroic aspirations of our founding fathers. And it severed the physical relationship between Westport House and the town. So to get to Westport House, you go down to the quay, about 3 miles away. But Lady Sheelan Brown took over Westport House around 10 years ago, and we developed a new psychological relationship with them, which is a very positive relationship. And there was an area halfway up the lawn where the estate wall was close to the town centre, and in partnership with them, we built a new set of gates. So for the first time in about 60 or 70 years, you could go from the town into the house, and it repaired those relationships tremendously. Physically, it was not only an important thing, but mentally and psychologically, it was like a negative cloud over the town for a half a century. And the gates were finished, and they're called locally, in very biblical terms, the Gates of Atonement. This is Lady Sheelan Brown. She's Grace O'Malley's great-great-granddaughter 14 times, and there she is at the Gates of Atonement at the opening, very pleased. And Grace O'Malley, you've probably heard of her, the Pirate Queen. We don't really know what she looks like. We just have this image of her, but we found this girl on the internet, and we think she might have looked a little bit like her. So this was Grace, and she was very savvy, and she knew how to work with government, so she was very cute. And she was raiding all the English ships, pirating them off the west coast, and Elizabeth sent the Crown forces to suppress her, and Grace says, I better go talk to Elizabeth. So she hopped in her Connemara hooker, went down the coast, around by Penzance and Cornwall, and she came up to Greenwich Palace, and she walked into the great chamber where Queen Elizabeth was. And one of the courtiers came up to Grace O'Malley and said, "You haven't bowed to the Queen." And quick as you like, Grace O'Malley turned around and says, "Royalty doesn't bow to royalty." And the next problem was that they couldn't communicate, because Grace only had Gaelic and Elizabeth only had English. But they were both educated women. They were educated by the church, so they both had Latin. And they conversed in Latin. And being women in a highly male-dominated world back then, they got on like a house on fire. And apparently she was free to pillage for the rest of her life. So the moral of the story is it pays to cooperate with the government. And then at the opening of the Gates of Atonement, who better than the Clubé Pipe Band and 1,000 townspeople, with the town manager and Lady Shulin Brown metaphorically hand in hand, walking through the gates, led by the Clubé Pipe Band, right up to the front gates of Westport House. So really, for a town to survive, it must have a strong collective consciousness, and to develop coherently, it must set goals for its future. And that is exactly what you have done, and we know this, because by putting a plan like this together, it harnesses your community, you have a collective buy-in, and this is very potent, this document. This will harness development into the future, and I know because we've been there 20 years ago, and you're starting in a position way ahead that we were 20 years ago. So Longford is a super town, you're great architectural heritage. I often come up to Dublin in the car and I go down, what's the road called? Barrack Street. It's one of my favourite architectural journeys, going down Barrack Street. I assume it's where all the merchant princes lived. And you can see all the best of Georgian architecture, Victorian houses, you have a little bit of Celtic revival down there, you have Neo-Palladianism, there's a 70s period house, but they've all the best of architecture and little pavilions all the way down that road. It's one of my favourite drives in the country, and it does my heart good, like Longford does, every time I come through it. And I must stay here more often because it's a happening place, and you have a great future. Thanks very much.